My biggest motivation is I do not want to go back to the place I was in a full-on panic attack on the floor in the server room of my office, not sure whether I want to keep going anymore. Not just as a dentist, not sure whether I want to keep going anymore.
Not a great place to be, is it?
It's not. And that is such a motivation for me that I don't want to go back there. And I don't want anyone else to go there. I really don't. So I have to make a conscious decision every day to look for wins.
How do we optimize our thinking, stop ruminating about the past and worrying about the future, orient ourselves to the present, and overcome fear in an ever-changing world? Let's talk all about it with author, keynote speaker, and elite success coach, Dr. Eric Recker, right here on episode 497 of The Nurse Keith Show. Hey there, this is Nurse Keith. This podcast is always about you and your personal professional development, your career, and the healthcare system in the bigger picture. And I'm always here to share education ideas and informative interviews with some of the most inspiring people from the worlds of healthcare, nursing, entrepreneurship, and beyond. I love having you along for the ride, and I thank you from the bottom of my nurse podcaster's heart for being part of the growing Nurse Keith Nation. If you'd like to help other people find the show, you can leave a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts. That's super helpful. You become a patron at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Nurse Keith. Or you can just share the show with anyone who you think might get something out of it or enjoy it. So no matter how you're interacting with the Nurse Keith Show, thank you so much for being here. You can go to nursekeith.com to find the show notes, and the show notes are always in whatever podcast app where you're listening on your smartphone or other device. And as I said, we're here with Dr. Eric Recker. He's the author of the book, That Damn Analogy. And Eric, it's great to have you here, and there's a lot to talk about. I have a lot of questions for you and things to touch on, and your book is awesome. And my first question is this, and it's a kind of a big picture one. So why do so many of us, and I'm including myself in this in a big way, why do we spend so much time on non-optimal thinking, ruminating about the past, worrying about the future, and not being in the present? So where does that all come from?
Yeah, first of all, Keith, thanks for having me. It's a privilege to be able to be on your show, and thanks for reading my book. I really appreciate that. I think the short answer to your question is because it's easy.
Okay.
It's really easy. We pick up our phones. We're not finding things that bring us joy and make us lighthearted and bring us into the moment. We find things maybe that remind us about our past or cause us to worry about the future. There's been a lot of worry about the future the last couple of weeks. We had kind of a big event in the US. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of people, and it was very easy to find things to worry about. And so living in the present, deep thinking, doing real deep work requires us to slow down, be less stimulated, get mindful, and actually be in quiet. It's kind of a revolutionary thing in 2024, Keith, is for us to actually be quiet. So I think if that answers your question, I think that the short answer is that it's just easy.
Yeah. And, I count myself among people when I ask you these questions who I feel like my mind does take the easy way. And I know myself pretty well. I'm 60 years old. I know that I'm a worrier. I know that I have that proclivity, and I know that human beings are wired for negativity. There's been a lot of research and stuff that's come out about the brain, et cetera, and that we have to really push back against that atavistic wiring that comes from, who knows, eons ago, right? So if we're sabotaging ourselves by not being in the present, and we're either in the past or future, and we're worried about stuff that's going to happen or could happen, or we're ruminating about stuff from the past, which I do a lot of, I admit. So what are some of the tools you've found in the hard work you've done on yourself that you find are universally or relatively universally helpful?
Yeah. So one is just a simple question. Is this worth worrying about? When we find ourselves being tempted to worry or find ourselves in full on worry, is this something worth worrying about? And if it is, sometimes it is. As we were talking before the show, I have some big things going on in my dental practice. And there are some of those things that would be easy for me to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I'm asking that question, is it worth worrying about? If the answer is yes, then what is the next step? What is one concrete thing we can do? Or what is the next question that we need to ask? Because of all the things that we worry about, 94% of those things don't happen. And the 6% that happen usually to a lesser degree than that catastrophic level that we were thinking they were going to happen. So we take something that spins in our mind and feels really heavy and really complex, and we ask a question that makes it more tangible. Is it worth worrying about? And then you have your flow chart. If it isn't worth worrying about, go do something else and just let it go. If it is worth worrying about, what's the next thing I'm going to do about it?
Mm-hmm. And in your peregrinations and figuring out how to do this for yourself, where did the solutions come from for you? Like, how did you learn these hard lessons and then, you know, change the way that your mind works and your brain works? How did you do that?
Well, let's just be completely honest. I'm going to go ahead and raise my hand and say I, Eric Recker, am a recovering worrier. I have a proclivity towards worry as well. Worry is my downhill sledding.
Mm-hmm.
It's my default. So I've had to ask myself those questions. I just got sick of it. I just got sick of worrying about so many things, and I thought there has to be a better way. I went way down the path with some really bad, some panic attacks, worries type stuff. And now I have learned that we can ask some of these questions. We can pause. Sometimes that's another technique we can use, Keith, is we can just pause and just take a few deep breaths and come back to the present moment. Because worry will take us everywhere. Pause, take a few deep breaths, bring us back into the moment, and we get a little bit more rational brain when we're in the moment than when our mind is just spinning all over the place.
Mm-hmm. So there's those are mindfulness techniques, right? Taking a deep breath, bringing yourself back into the present. There's a lot of talk about mindfulness in medicine and in popular culture. And, we can go back to John Kabat-Zinn and full catastrophe living and, all that stuff that goes back, right? Um, so there's plenty of tools. I mean, you can Google mindfulness tools and you could find a million articles, right?
Yep.
So let's say we've got a nurse who works really hard. She or he has a pretty stressful job. And you know what healthcare is like. You're a healthcare provider. And the economy is really tough for a lot of us. We recently had an election that's caused a lot of people distress on wherever they happen to be on the political spectrum. There's been a lot of distress and anxiety. And there's a lot of anxiety about the future. Like people are worried about climate change and nuclear war. And, I don't have to list it all for you. And then there's just the way healthcare is these days. That causes a lot of us distress for our own health and also working in a system that feels dysfunctional and sick. So when you're a healthcare provider, a nurse, et cetera, and you work in a pretty high stress environment, how do you work with that so that you can help your mind and help your heart um, just deal with everything that's on your plate? Where do you begin when life feels so overwhelming from every angle you could possibly think of?
Yeah. I love that question because that was me. And it caused me to nearly sell my dental practice and walk away
Wow.
because I was torched. I had way too many things going on in my life and I was taking terrible care of myself. And that's a dangerous equation that I think a lot of people could raise their hand. If I said, hey, everybody, you have to raise your hand if you have too many things on your plate and you're not doing a good job taking care of yourself, right? The hands
Hmm.
would shoot up like crazy. So it's a
Right.
common thing. And what I found is that I would come home at the end of the day and my wife would say, how was your day? And I would say, oh, this happened. This thing went wrong. I had a patient that said this or this or this. I would reduce a whole day to the least common denominator. And it's super easy. We all do it. So I needed a better way. So I spent a lot of time in quiet trying to just, how do I pull myself up out of this? What kind of things do I need to do? So I created a new paradigm. And that paradigm is called Win the Now. And what I love about that is I was able to take a day, which for me is too much. A day is too much to measure. It really is. Because how many patient interactions can we have in a day?
Hmm.
When we're full clicking with hygienists and I have all my patients and I talk to all my team members, I could have 40 or 50 conversations a day. And if I'm going to reduce all of that to the worst thing that happened, I'm going to have a lot of bad days. So I went looking for wins. I reduced my day into 15-minute increments. That's just how I did it. That's how my schedule works. I do X number of 15-minute blocks for when I do procedures. And then I have to go check hygienists and do all of that. So what does a win look like in that 15 minutes? A win might look like we had a great procedure, or I had a good conversation with a patient, or I was able to help someone who was anxious not be so anxious. I had a good interaction with my hygienist. There's lots of things that can happen to be a win. We're also going to take some losses. Sometimes dental anesthetic isn't perfect.
Hmm.
And so maybe somebody doesn't get numb. Maybe somebody had a really bad toothache. So in those times when it feels like a loss, I ask myself one question: what can I learn from this? And I maybe just make a note of it on a piece of paper I have in my pocket, or I get my phone out and put something in my note app real quick so I know to go back to that. So it doesn't have to just sit in my mind. And so once we learn something from that, then it becomes a win. And even if we take a loss, we got to get right back in the game because there's more opportunities for wins. And so when I changed my mindset that way, I would come home and my wife would say, how was your day? I was more likely to start talking about the wins that I found during the day. I still had to process the bad stuff that happened, but I was more likely to learn from it and less likely to let it eat away at me. So for everyone who, whatever your practice looks like, maybe you're a surgical nurse. So your now looks like a surgical procedure. What do wins look like in that? What are good outcomes in that? And then later you might have a meeting. Well, what do wins look like in that meeting? I showed up, I participated, I was attentive, I led the meeting well. And then later you go home to your family. You got to get back in the game, got to be back in the moment with your family. What do wins look like at the dinner table? Everybody puts their phones down, maybe we ask some good questions to each other, maybe we actually have some real interaction, but it all happens because we're back in the moment and we're looking for wins.
Hmm. So, well, thanks for being honest about your own process. That's really helpful to hear, right? Um, and so this is really when it boils down to it, what I get from your book and what I get from what you're saying is that it really all comes down to mindset, right? We really have to work with our mindset. And like I was saying earlier, there's so many things that push against that mindset, that push us in the direction of negativity and worry and anxiety and rumination about whether the past or the future. So what I also get from you then is that it takes a certain amount of discipline. And where does the drive for that discipline come from? Like, is it just an internal drive, or do you have to find some other source of impetus to get that drive going, you know?
Yeah. So I've definitely found that you will find what you're looking for,
Mm-hmm.
right? The internet's a perfect example. If I wanted to find a theory to support whatever my idea was, I could find it. If I wanted to find reasons to like a certain candidate or hate a certain candidate, I can find them. If I want to find worry, stress, fear, and anxiety, I can find them. If I want to find wins, I can find them. My biggest motivation is I do not want to go back to the place I was in a full on panic attack on the floor in the server room of my office, not sure whether I want to keep going anymore.
Mm.
Not just as a dentist, not sure whether I want to keep going anymore.
Not a great place to be, is it?
It's not. And that is such a motivation for me that I don't want to go back there. And I don't want anyone else to go there. I really don't. So I have to make a conscious decision every day to look for wins.
Mm-hmm.
I really do, because like I said, I'll find what I'm looking for.
Yeah. And in the second half of the show, I want to talk more about solutions from your book. But there's something in your book I wanted to touch on before we take a quick break. And that's the statement that you made that we all trade our energy and our time for experiences. And there's a lot to dig in around that. Like, what does that mean that we trade our energy and time for experiences? But one question I have for you reading your book and just kind of like thinking about this whole concept is, how many bad trades are we all making every day? And how do you talk about that whole idea of trading energy and time?
Yeah, Keith, you know what? If we were trading on a platform like E-Trade or something like that, we would have
Mm-hmm.
run out of money, because we're choosing into that. So we all have, let's start with phones. Okay. And I
Okay.
know people are going to get twitchy with phones, but we've never, as far as I know, we've never had something that is more likely to steal us from the present moment than a phone.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, if we go way, 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 way back, a saber-toothed tiger showing up is going to get you out of the moment and get you into a different moment. I get it. But we've never had something where we can be so present yet so absent at the same time. And then we get a report. If you have an Apple phone, I'm not sure about Android phones, but if you get an Apple phone on Sunday mornings, you get a report card. How much screen time did you spend?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to ask the question, what experiences did I say no to so that I could acquire that much screen time?
Good question.
Who did I choose to not, which of my kids did I choose to not play with to get that screen time? When did I choose to not talk with my spouse, with a friend, with whatever? And this is not me pointing fingers, because I've been down this road and I still struggle with it. They're magnetic.
Mm-hmm.
The app developers are smarter than we are, Keith.
They
They
are.
just are. So, but we have to ask ourselves, with the things that we do, are we willing to trade this amount of time for this experience? And to go along with that, every yes that you say is a no to something else. You can say a whole bunch of yeses, but there's probably going to be some no's that have to happen as well in the midst of that. And the first thing to go is family. It just seems like that's the first thing to go. So I try to ask myself, with the things that I'm doing, and I'm in a point where I'm in a building phase of my coaching and speaking right now, and it requires a lot of connections and a lot of meeting time. And both of my kids are out of the house at this point, so I have to be really careful, because I go 100%.
Mm-hmm.
I can get into death by meeting, where I have all these connections and all this growth and all these opportunities and all this kind of stuff. But my wife would like some time with me as well. I have some friends, and those relationships are valuable, and I need to nurture those relationships as well. So what are we choosing to do with our time? And is that experience something we want to trade our time for?
It's a good question. I mean, a lot of us do think about things like, how long our commute is, all those sorts of things. But, and I don't want to get into this because we could talk for an hour about this, but we never needed phones before, and we never needed to, if you have a thought you want to communicate to somebody, you know, we never before needed to send that thought to someone while we're driving. Like we would always think, oh, I'll call them when I get home because that's what we were able to do. And somehow we've been rewired. And there's research about how our brains are being rewired. And again, we can't go down this rabbit hole, but it, the level of distraction and getting our time eaten up. So, when I read about that in your book, this whole idea of trading energy and time for experience, really, I mean, that made so much sense. And that was my question for you. Like, are we making bad trades most of the time? And I think you're saying that we have to be pretty conscious to not do that. And
Yeah.
that feels like that can sabotage so many aspects of our life, don't you think?
Yeah. And as you're saying this, the way you put that, the way I heard you say trade, it's always fun to be on podcasts because you hear things from a different perspective. But asking ourselves, we're talking about investments, right? We think about investments, things like that. Is this a good investment of our time?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or is that a good trade? Is it a good investment? Am I going to like the ROI on that? Am I going to like what happens with that? Right? And yes, we have to work. I get it. We'd all like to say, well, I'd like to choose to work a little bit less. Sure. But then I ask you, people want flexible time and they want time off.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Is that flexible time and time off going to help fill you up? Or is it just going to drain you more because you're going to make more bad trades? I think it's a good question to ask.
That's an excellent question. And when we come back from the break, I think that's a really good place for us to come back to the analogy at the heart of your book, that idea of inflow and outflow, which I want to get into, and a couple other things in terms of positive action steps we can take based on the work that you do and what you've found really works for you and others that who you help and coach and people you speak to. So please hang in there with us. We're going to come right back for the second half of episode 497 of the Nurse Keith Show. And we're here with elite success coach, dentist, author, and keynote speaker, Dr. Eric Recker. Hey everyone, let's take a quick pause for the cause, shall we? Thanks for being a valued listener of the Nurse Keith Show. And if you'd like to help other people find the podcast, please consider leaving a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This really helps propel the show and grow our audience. And I truly appreciate everyone who's already taken the time. And if leaving a public rating review isn't your thing, why not tell a colleague about the Nurse Keith Show by sending them a link so they can listen for themselves? After all, word of mouth is the most organic way for me to reach those who truly need to tune in. So if you'd like to do me a solid, please consider leaving a rating review or telling a friend or colleague. And by doing so, you'll be helping the Nurse Keith Show reach more and more nurses and healthcare professionals all around the world. Now, let's get back to today's conversation. And welcome back to the second half of the episode. We're here again with friend of the pod and my new friend and colleague, Dr. Eric Recker. And Eric, prior to the break, you brought up, I can't remember exactly how you said it, but it brought to mind the analogy at the heart of your book and this whole concept of outflow and inflow, which I want to get to. But your name of your book is That Damn Analogy, DAM, that damn analogy, how to fill up, stay up, and impact the world following a few simple steps. So what is that analogy that's at the heart of your book? How would you encapsulate that for us?
Yeah. So at the heart of it, Keith, we are like a dam. Everybody has seen a dam, knows what it looks like. I think most people understand how it works. On one side is a reservoir of water, and we call that usually a lake. And then we have the dam itself, that's us. And on the other side, we have a river or an outflow gate or overflow or whatever we want to call it. What we do as people, as the dam, all we're really doing is controlling the flow of energy that goes through us. That's it. So we're pretty good at the outflow part. The outflow is all the stuff that we do to impact the world. It's our job. It's the things we volunteer for. It's the roles and the identities that we have. It's the things that we do. It's our to-do list. We're pretty good at the outflow part. We're not so good at the inflow part. We don't tend to take very good care of ourselves. And then we have to face the consequences of not taking very good care of ourselves. We don't have much left in the tank. We can't really keep the river going if there's not something in the lake. And there's all sorts of consequences that happen when we let our reserves get down too low.
Okay. And so what are some prime examples of, let's just say, positive inflow? So what are a few that come to mind for you that work for you?
Yeah, one of the things that I really like to talk with people about is I love a vacation.
Mm-hmm.
I love a 1 week vacation. Keith, I'm sure you love a 1 week vacation. Everybody loves that. But how many 1 week vacations do we get in a year? Maybe a couple, right? If we're
Yeah.
lucky, we get a little more. But let's say we get two. All right. What usually happens with a vacation? We coast into it on fumes, right? We have almost nothing left. We're like, got to get to vacation, got to get to vacation. And it may take us 5 days to really get uncorked on that vacation where we actually settle in. Well, guess what? Then we have a day and then we start worrying about going back.
Mm-hmm.
So while I love week-long vacations, what we have a whole lot more of is Tuesdays, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what can we do on a Tuesday to help refill us? So I'm a huge fan of the term micro resilience. So I want us to think of all kinds of things we can do to fill us back up a little bit. So the supplement industry has yet to figure out anything better for us than 20 minutes of movement outside, right? 20
Mm-hmm.
minutes in the sunlight with some movement. If you can get that as many days as possible, fantastic. Okay, you don't have 20 minutes, you have 10 minutes. Can you take a quick walk around the block? Can you walk up and down a couple flights of stairs? Can you choose to not pick your phone up and instead take a couple deep breaths? Can you write down a few things that you're thankful for? Can you try to take a little more time and actually exhaust your thankfulness? Write how many things you're thankful for until you can't think of anything else at all. Pick up your phone, send an encouraging text to a friend. Call up somebody that you haven't talked to for a while that you really want to talk to. Take a different route home. Disrupt your routine a little bit. All kinds of things we have. One thing that's even kind of cheesy, look up power poses. Power poses. So like standing as wide and tall as you can, sitting back in your chair, making yourself bigger. What we do is we make ourselves small. We lean
Mm-hmm.
forward, we cross our legs, and we hunch over. It's not good for energy. Sit back, sit in a power pose, stand with your hands on your hips and your legs spread a little bit more, look out the window for a few minutes. All kinds of things like this. We have opportunities to do these every day, and we don't need a lot of them. A power pose in front of the window looking outside for 2 minutes can increase dopamine. It can decrease cortisol. This is science. These aren't just woo-woo things. These are things that actually put us in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. And when you were talking about someone standing with their hands on their hips and their, feet far apart, looking out the window, at whatever is outside, greenery or something. I was picturing that person instead choosing to hunch over their phone and scroll Instagram, right? So, and I think this goes back to what we were talking about in the first half about trading our energy and time for experience, right? So you can make the trade of I'm going to scroll through Instagram for 5 minutes, right? Or do something that you just recommended. So those, I guess everyone can come up with their own list of what the inflow is that works for them. And of course, you know, people can argue that there's plenty of dopamine hits you get from, seeing how many likes you got on your Instagram post. But you and I know that that's kind of a game of diminishing returns over time. And you're talking about things that have much more power, staying power, and ability to really affect us, in a positive way. So talking about this concept of outflow and inflow, you use an analogy in your book about the Red Sea versus the Dead Sea. And I have been to the Dead Sea many, many years ago. I've not been to the Red Sea. And I'm curious, how would you bring that analogy in? We've already talked about the dam. So let's do the Red Sea, Dead Sea analogy.
Yeah. So before I do that, I just want to say a lot of people say that well, I don't know how this is going to work for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I can help fill myself back up. Some of those things you said, I don't think those will work for me. I have come up with a list of 150 refueling strategies that we can have. And if you want to put that in the show notes, Keith, we certainly can. It's an easy resource for people to grab because
Sure.
you're going to find something out of 150 strategies. So I just want to make sure that we offer that to people so they don't feel like, what am I supposed to do with this? But the Red Sea and the Dead Sea, the interesting thing about that is there's really only one major difference between the Red Sea and the Dead Sea. Now they're a little different altitude wise and things like that. But the real big difference is that the Dead Sea has no outflow.
Mm-hmm.
No outflow at all. So you look at the Red Sea, it's vibrant. There's marine life there. There's lots of commerce happening there. People can enjoy it. It's full of life. The Dead Sea, you can die from drinking the water. The Dead Sea, you have to be careful in how much you're exposed to it. There's some good things from it. Dead Sea skincare products, stuff like that. There are people who definitely want to experience it. But what happens when we don't have any outflow, then the world just becomes about us. We get more concentrated on us, more narcissistic, more only focused on us. And that's a scary place to be. It really is. Those are those people that when you're having a conversation with, they can't wait to share their part. They're not very interesting to talk to because they're always hijacking the conversation. Because look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. I think we were made for impact. I believe that 100%. I think most nurses believe that they were made for impact. There are probably other things they could do that maybe wouldn't be so mentally taxing and wouldn't be so much, that didn't lead to burnout quite as much. But we have to focus on our outflow too. How can we impact the world? The Red Sea has huge impact. The Dead Sea keeps getting more concentrated with minerals as the water that flows into it just evaporates, and it's not very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good analogy. I think it's related to the dam analogy, right? Because the inflow and outflow. But I liked the Red Sea, Dead Sea comparison. I thought that was really helpful, and it's a good image. It's very apt. You're an athlete. I think you're sort of a recovering triathlete, right? You've done a lot of intensive athletic activity over the years.
Yep.
And I think you've climbed a lot of mountains. So I know that mountains are important to you because you've spent a lot of time on them. But I also think they're important to you because, again, you seem to be someone similar to me that you like metaphors. And it seems like, your time climbing Kilimanjaro and related activities have brought a lot to you in terms of the way you think about life. So, what would you say about your experience climbing and mountains that you feel like you can relate to people's lives in terms of how they approach the stressors and the inflow or outflow or lack thereof?
Yeah. Mountains are my happy place.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit ironic that I live in Iowa because there are no mountains. But over time you figure out where are the places where you would say it is well with my soul. And for me, that's the mountains. When my wife and I have been to a beach before, it's super fun. I love the sun. I don't sit still super well. So I'm kind of actively on the beach. I'll sit and read a book and then I'll go snorkel or paddleboard or go for a walk on the beach, whatever. My wife and I love to go to Utah specifically. And so when we go out there, I will hike almost every day that I'm there. I just love it. I'll get up before the sun comes up and I try to be at a trailhead and start walking a little bit in the dark just because I love it. It is time for me to just be quiet in nature, to be still in nature. A lot of times I get to interact with other people, which is super fun. But if I'm going on a hike on a Tuesday, there's a good chance I'm not going to see many other people. And I come back feeling so recharged. I really do. Whether it's sitting and looking out the window at the mountains and just pondering the vastness of creation and how cool it is that we get to experience that, whether it's the fresh air, whether it's the pictures that I get to take and look back, whether it's the lessons that I learn, it's just the mountains are my happy place. And so I find as many opportunities as I can possibly be in the mountains.
Hmm. And you live in Iowa. How interesting. Yeah. So go figure.
Yep.
Um,
So my wife and I, last year, we spent about 60 nights in Utah altogether. So our goal is to eventually get that closer to 90 or even more.
mhm.
With time, we'll see what happens, but that's kind of what our goal is.
I appreciate that. I've spent a lot of time in Utah myself, so I definitely get it. And so, in terms of people who are listening, who you know, most of them are nurses. Probably 99% of the listeners are nurses, and like I said, many are very hardworking. Many probably work in a fairly stressful environment. There's some lucky ones who don't work in high stress environments. Like myself, I have a nursing job that's not very high stress at all. So I'm very lucky in that particular way. So we talked about your list of 150 different methods or strategies for bringing some positive inflow in. So that's a good place to start in terms of how you kind of feed yourself. So, what are some of the other go tos that you find either when you're speaking, when you're doing success coaching, that you think are the things that work for the most people? What are the common things that you find are most effective?
So I think the most effective thing that you can do is be honest with yourself about where you are
Mm-hmm.
by far. So when I do my workshops, we start off with it's very simple, 1 to 10 scale. 1 is completely empty. 10 is full as you can be. I'm rocking life. I couldn't be any better if I had to be. And I have people just circle a number really quick. What's your number? And so they circle it. And then as we start to talk, people realize that they're not being truthful with themselves. I think it's the biggest problem is that we lie and tell ourselves that we are a 6, 7, or an 8 when we're really a 2, 3, or a 4. We do it all the time. We're super healthcare workers are superheroes. I fully believe it. The things that we're able to do for people and bless people, all of that. But we're a bunch of liars. We really are. We're a bunch of posers, really, because we won't be honest with ourselves about where we're at. And the problem is dishonesty with ourselves over time leads to burnout.
Mm-hmm.
It just does. So you've had a really, really stressful week. Okay, you have to find some time to do some things that make your heart sing.
Right.
Even if your weekend is really busy, there's got to be some time in there. You have to be, and here's another one, you have to be a little bit selfish so that you can be selfless. What good is it going to do your family or your team at the office or whatever if you get really sick because you've been pushing it too hard? It's not going to do anybody any good. You can either choose to take care of yourself or your body is going to choose it for you.
Mm-hmm. That brings to mind that book that I haven't read yet called Your Body Keeps the Score. I think that's what it's called. That's one that's been on my mind lately. And it's all about the ways that the body stores that stuff up and we pay the price one way or the other. So I think that's kind of where you're headed with that.
Mm-hmm.
So so when people want to connect with you, they go to ericrecker.com. It's ERICRECKER. And I know you're on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. Do do people work with you one on one? You mentioned workshops, but do people work with you as a, a success coach?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I do one-on-one coaching. I have a heart for people in healthcare. I
Mm-hmm,
really do.
mm-hmm,
I know enough people who are in the different professions to know that it's hard in a different way. It just is. And people who aren't in it a lot of times don't really get it. So I love to be an ally to my friends in healthcare for sure. I love to do workshops in this. We do workshops about the dam analogy. I love to come in and do that for groups, for teams that are feeling stressed, to be able to give, first of all, a common language to communicate, and then some strategies to be able to work together as a team to try to help each other out through this.
mm.
So, yeah, I usually work with people in 2 to 3 month increments, and we have an initial consultation. We kind of go from there.
And if someone's like a chief nursing officer or something and they want a workshop like that for a wellness program, they can just reach out to you.
Absolutely. So yeah, I have a speaking tab on my website, and there's a contact area down there. It just starts the ball rolling, and then I get back to you, and then we have a conversation.
Awesome. That's great. And before we go, though, I have four kind of lightning round questions I ask all my guests, and they're not related directly to what we're talking about, but you'll relate them in your own way. So are you up for four quick questions?
Let's do it.
Okay. So I think I already know what the answer is, and our listeners probably do too, but I just want to hear it from you just in a succinct response. So I always ask my guests how they define success. What does success mean? What does it look like?
Yep. So my definition of success is making a difference. I exist to make a difference in the world that's utterly disproportionate to who I am.
Wow, it's a good one. I like that.
So it's about impact.
Yeah, that makes sense based on what I know about you. So that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Second question. Is there one person you could name or describe who's inspired you in your life? They could be living or dead, a famous person, or just someone from your personal life who you just comes to mind, who's like just one of those people who just are super close to your heart.
Yeah, I'm going to say my wife. And the reason I'm going to say my wife, I refer to her in the book as the fabulous Amy Recker,
Mm-hmm.
because she is. I'm not who I am without someone supporting me. And she has been maybe supportive to a fault. I've done a lot of really crazy things, but she's been there supporting me the whole time, and I couldn't be more thankful for her.
I feel the same about my wife. So I hear you on that. Okay. Third one. Is there a book, a film, something from the Y culture that is sort of like a touchstone for you that you go back to over and over again?
Oh boy. Well, faith is huge for me, Keith.
Mhm.
So I have to say the Bible for me. That is definitely what I go. I'm amazed at every time I read through it, just the new truths that I am finding, and also just the reminder to slow down.
Mhm.
That was
That's
modeled
wonderful.
very well. So yeah.
Yeah, you're not the first person to mention that. So I hear you on that one for sure. Okay, last one. If you were named king of the world tomorrow, King Eric, okay, and you had ultimate power, you could do everything you ever wanted to do, right? But what would be your first act as king to improve the lives of your subjects? Out of the box, like your first action, you know?
First action. Well, I'd make everybody get outside and have 20 minutes of movement every day.
That's good. I like
Yeah.
it. Good
Yep.
place to start. Well,
Yep.
I'm doing my 5,000 steps a day, so I'm there with you. So,
Love it.
yeah. All right. Eric, this has been great. I think we've gotten a good encapsulation of your book, that damn analogy, and a good hit of kind of where you're coming from and your whole focus on mindset. And I think the whole win the now concept is a really powerful one. And I think you're doing some great work in the world. And you're a healthcare provider too, so you're kind of touching people on many levels. And I really appreciate you being here. I hope people go to ericrecker.com, ericrecker.com, and we'll make sure we get that list of 150 things people can do for inflow into the show notes. So thank you so much. This has been great. You're awesome, and I appreciate you gracing the airwaves with us.
Thanks for having me, Keith. It's been fun.
Well, there you have it. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nurse Keith Show. Remember, head to the show notes at nursekeith.com or just look at the phone where you are and you'll see the links right there to go over to ericrecker.com. If you need personalized holistic career coaching, check out Nurse Keith Coaching at nursekeith.com. Mention the show and get 10% off your first coaching package. We are proud members of the Health Podcast Network at healthpodcastnetwork.com. And I am grateful to be produced by the wonderful and inimitable Rob Johnston of 520R Podcasting. Before we say goodbye, I'll leave you with this quote by the musician Robert Fripp. May my living honor my parents. May my living repay the debt of my existence. Be well, dig deep, seek joy, keep in touch. This is Nurse Keith saying adios till next time from beautiful Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the wonderful, inimitable Dr. Eric Recker saying arrivederci from
Hella, Iowa.
All right. Eric, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for listening. This has been a great episode. Check out ericrecker.com and we will catch you on the proverbial flip side.